I know, and now we're recording. I know we all look forward to this report each year. My friends and colleagues here at Stelter have taken a close look at the data to uncover what's really happening across the subsectors. Today, we'll walk through what we found, what it means for your organization, and how you can use those insights to strengthen your fundraising strategy. At Stelter, we're passionate about helping nonprofits like yours discover opportunities for growth through asset-based giving. We also love to foster connections across the nonprofit community through webinars like these, bringing together in-house experts like today and thought leaders from around the country to share ideas, actionable insights, and practical tips fundraisers can use right away. So we've got a lot of exciting takeaways to share with you over the next 75 minutes. But first, a few housekeeping notes. All attendees are automatically muted to minimize background noise and ensure everyone can hear the presentation clearly. If you have a question at any point during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature to submit it. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can during the Q&A portion at the end. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll send a follow-up email with the recording and any additional resources after the event. With that, let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenters, all of whom I have the privilege of working with here at Stelter. We have Lynn Gaumer, our senior gift planning consultant, who will lead our panel discussion today. Joining her are Casey Birch, our senior client strategist, who will be covering health, Janet Cobb, client strategist and team lead speaking on education, Renee Durnan, principal client strategist covering human services and international affairs, Kit Lancaster, strategist speaking on arts, culture, humanities, and community benefit, and Amber Moore, associate client strategist covering religion, environment, and animal welfare. Here's a look at what they'll be covering today. First, Lynn will lay the groundwork with some context and key findings. Next, each strategist will dive into the subsectors listed on the screen. Then, our six experts will share their perspectives on what's influencing giving now and what they expect to see through the rest of 2026. Finally, we'll wrap up taking some questions. So before I hand it off to Lynn, we do want to know who is here today with us. So we're going to do a quick poll. Becca, let's go ahead and launch that poll asking which nonprofit sector does your nonprofit serve? If you could just take a second. Wonderful. Appreciate you guys taking the survey here today. It looks like we have a great mix of different types of nonprofits, a lot of education, but also health, human services, international affairs represented, religion, love seeing it, all sectors, arts and culture, even environment and animals, public society benefits. So really appreciate giving us some insight. It's helpful to know who we're talking to today and who's represented. So I'm going to end the poll now. And with that, thanks for being with us today. We're glad you're here. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Lynn.
Thanks, Jeremy, for that great introduction, and thanks for participating in our poll today. We'll have one more towards the end of the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the groundwork, look at some key findings, and give you some context on the Giving USA 2026 report. But first, before I do that, let's just take a look back. Remember 2025, what happened in that during that year that really impacted giving by individuals and to giving to the sectors that they decided to give to? So market performance, generally speaking, charitable giving follows the trajectory of the stock market, and the S&P 500 had a great total return of almost 18%. Inflation averaged 2.6%, but generally cost of living remained elevated, so there were some inflation concerns as well. GDP increased about 2.1%, and again, charitable giving will generally follow the gross domestic product. Demographic shifts. We have more than 11,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day. So Those individuals are retiring. Some of them are passing their assets. You've heard of probably the Great Wealth Transfer, and you'll hear more about that later today. So that's impacting giving as well in 2025. We had new Congress, we had new administration. We had changes and reductions in government funding. We had a new tax law be implemented, and we had natural disasters, unfortunately. We had the California wildfires and flooding in Texas. So, all of that impacted generally who's giving and where they're giving to. So, I'm pleased to report that charitable giving surpassed the $600 billion mark. I remember writing an article really encouraging everyone to focus on their planned giving programs to see if we can pass that $600 billion mark last year, and sure enough, we did it. So $617.2 billion last in 2025, and when you break that down, that is more than a 1.69 billion dollars every single day. So these are just two of the numbers that you can use to really grow that planned giving program or start a planned giving program and bring this to your CEOs and CFOs and board and talk to them about the numbers that we're going to be talking about today. But first, I would like to talk about generosity by source. And what I mean by that is who is giving. So individuals remain the primary source of charitable giving. Without a doubt, 64% of all charitable giving is by individuals. That's great news for your planned giving programs. That breaks down to $394.2 billion in individual giving. Foundation giving, that's like community foundations and private foundation continues to grow. That's once again has surpassed the $100 billion mark at 117.5 billion and represents 19% of all charitable giving. Well, who else is giving? Well, Bequest had a banner year last year. They had a whopping 19.7 increase from 2024. So a lot of people are asking, is the Great Wealth Transfer finally here? I'm not sure about that. We're going to take a deeper dive in a few slides here. And then, but also total bequest giving tends to fluctuate based on estates of high net worth donors. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And then corporate giving, that's the smallest share of the pie, just over 43.6 billion, a 3.1% increase. It remains the smallest source, but it has grown the most among any source in the last 4 years. So that's kind of an interesting fact as well. When I look at the numbers from 2025, I do find them very interesting. But I think it's even more interesting when we start comparing numbers over time. So for example, here's 40 years, 1985 to 2025. How has giving changed? Well, we look at the largest section of the pie chart first. In 85, it was 80% of individuals. Now it's down to 64%. So you need to start asking, well, why is that? What is happening? Foundations grew immensely from 7% in 85 to 19% in 2025. Bequests also grew 7% in 1985 to 10% now. And then corporations grew a little bit, 6% in 1985 to 7% in 2025. So let's take a deeper dive into individual giving. So, what I learned from 2025, so the stock market had some huge gains. We saw that in the numbers, but consumer sentiment was generally low. So, I would have actually expected, given that the stock market had such a banner year in 2025, to be higher, but sentiment was lower. So there was kind of a mixed messaging there. We also had some legislative shifts, so tax reform, right? So uh, we had new tax reform that was implemented on July 4th of 2025. And some provisions took effect during that year, but others were taking effect as of January 1st of 2026. And I think many individuals were bunching or planning their gifts in that November, December timeframe, which also impacted year-end giving last year. What I thought was also interesting in the larger report for Giving USA is some key pathways for modern generosity. Giving circles, this number has tripled in the last 10 years. I did not know that until I read that report. Cryptocurrency, a lot of people are talking about it, but it had a huge increase, 66% over 2024. And the Giving Block processed more than 100 million in donations. Giving Tuesday hit a record 4 billion in 2025 with 38 million participants. Oops. More on individual giving. Now, when you read the reports and you take a look at giving over the long term, you see that the overall numbers have dropped. So it dropped about 3.4% in 2025, but that number has been shrinking over time, according to Giving USA, with the steepest losses among those small dollar donors, those giving $100 or less. And this is where like consumer sentiment and inflation can really impact here. And then you have your high net worth donors, and this is growing. And so, they are propelled by those stock market gains, right? Making strategic decisions based on gains in their stock portfolio. We had mega donors. We're going to hear more about that today. There was 19.22 billion in mega gifts led by Mackenzie Scott, Melinda French Gates, and others. Now, what I wanted to just touch base here, the new universal deduction. Now, that did not come into effect till this year, but it is expected, but I bring it up because it's important to put some perspective on it. It's expected to bring in about 8 million new donors, according to the Lilly School of Philanthropy's latest report on the tax reform. So those smaller donors, those lower level to mid-level donors who are giving smaller amounts, will they increase their giving to be able to take advantage of that new universal charitable deduction? And just to give you a little, just if you're not familiar with it, the universal charitable deduction is for those uh, who generally take the standard deduction, but for single filers, they can deduct $1,000. For married filing jointly, they can deduct up to $2,000. It doesn't matter if they itemize. So with 90% of the people taking the standard deduction, um, maybe this is going to definitely increase those number of donors. Now let's take a look at bequests. You see the trajectory here. That's great news. So in 1985, we're at 14.28 billion. Now we're over 60 billion. So the trajectory for bequests has been huge. So when you do talk about your planned giving program, or if you're starting a program, really, really you will want to market and reach out to individuals about bequest giving. Okay. Now, we've used the term bequests here during this webinar, and that's the term Giving USA uses. But just from a marketing perspective, we bequest, that that term does not necessarily resonate with your individual donors and your marketing material. So if you're working with Stelter, or you'll notice that we have revised our content to say like a gift in a will or a gift in a trust, and avoid that bequest language. So if you're not working with Stelter, certainly take a look at your marketing materials as well. What I loved about bequest giving is that the fact that, everyone's talking about this great wealth transfer. And is it here? Well, I don't know. It's only been a year since this huge jump, and I can't wait to be on this webinar next year and hoping to say that yes, the great wealth transfer is here. We've had another banner year in bequests, but we're going to start taking a look at that, and I hope that and if the wealth transfer truly is here, another reason to be promoting bequest giving in your marketing materials and your outreach to donors. What I also found interesting about the data as we dug in here is that states were broken up between under 1 million, 1 million to 10 million, and over 10 million. And what had the most growth? But the under 1 million category. And that's like that's more of your everyday donor instead of like your mega donors. So the outreach is so important for bequest giving. So, bequests remain the largest source of deferred charitable gifts. So, uh, it depends which resource you're looking at, but a lot of times they'll say like 88 to 90% of all planned gifts are bequest giving. So, and the average bequest gift is over 47,000, which is a lot more than like for many an outright gift. A lot of times the bequest gift is the largest gift that they will give. So we had the 4.12 billion going back to that chart on the previous slide reflects an estimated 86,000 in additional estates settling in 2025. So with the full 11.82 billion figure representing an estimated 248,000 estates. So the transfer of wealth for baby boomers creates a significant long-term opportunities for nonprofits. They are realized after a donor's lifetime. So if they are concerned about inflation or the price of gas or anything else in economic conditions, this is a great way to recognize their favorite nonprofit. And it really should be a year-round priority. Right now, we're in August. August is Make a Will Month. October is Estate Planning Awareness Month. But in reality, those are great ways to promote bequest giving, but you really want to do it year round, right? Some people are doing it as, a goal at the beginning of the year too. So you want to make sure it's at that time of the year or around tax time when they're meeting with their advisors. So it really should be a year round priority for your organization. So let's take a look at generosity by sector. So here you see where the charitable dollars are going, right? So religion leads the way, followed by human services, and then education, foundation, public society benefit, health, international affairs, arts, culture, and humanities, environmental and animals, and then lastly to individuals. Again, we want to look at this over time and how it changes. So you have 1985 again, 40 years ago to 2025, and you take a look. Religion was at 53%. Now it's at 23%. But Renee's going to give you some interesting perspective there that maybe human services is actually taking some of those religious dollars away from the actual religion category that Giving USA makes. Education has had huge increases, 9% to 14%. And then, public society benefit, Kit's going to give you some information on that, 6% all the way to 11%. So we're going to look at some history over time with each of our strategists. So I'm going to start with religion. And the reason why I'm starting here is because it does represent the largest share. Yet it has struggled to really grow over the last several years and keep up with the pace of inflation. So we're going to start here with Amber, and I'm going to turn it over to her. And I have two questions for you, Amber. What factors do you think are driving this downward shift, and how can faith-based organizations adapt to sustain donor support? Amber?
Thanks, Lynn. Those are great questions. Let's take a look and see what the data is telling us. In 2025, giving to religion grew 2.4% to $151.58 billion, but experienced a flat decline of 0.2% when adjusted for inflation. That is 23% of the total pie, as you mentioned. But as a side note, since 2005, religious giving has only grown 1% when adjusting for inflation. And when thinking about the data, I think it's important to talk about what Giving USA considers religion here. It includes giving to houses of worship like churches, mosques, and synagogues. It also includes religious media and communications as well as interfaith coalitions. It does not include religious schools, hospitals, and charities categorized under other subsectors like education or health. With that in mind, although we've seen religion's percentage drop over the years, it still remains the largest giving sector. And interestingly enough, if Giving USA included all religiously oriented charities, up to 75% of giving could be considered religious in nature. As we have mentioned, religion is the largest recipient sector at 23% of the total pie. That is the same percentage it had last year. That is down from the 24% we saw just a couple of years ago, and that is far below the 53% we saw in 1985. One of the reasons for this downward shift is religious disaffiliation. Although religious affiliation in the US remained stable from 24 to 2025, religious disaffiliation has continued to increase since 2013. Also, faith-based organizations do lag in new donor acquisition, 25.5% versus 32.1% across other sectors. But there is hope. 38% of surveyed churchgoers began attending their current congregation within the last 5 years, according to Hartford Institute of Religion Research. And the good news, religiously affiliated donors are more engaged, more loyal, and more likely to increase their giving. High net worth donors give more to religious causes as compared with the general population. Donor retention rates in faith-based organizations are higher than other nonprofit sectors, 61%, 61.3% in comparison with 54.7% respectively. And what we love to see, direct mail remains highly effective. 86% of religiously affiliated donors respond to it, and 25% are prompted to give online as a result. Some key takeaways and recommendations for the sector. One, DAFs are a significant opportunity. 50% of Fidelity charitable accounts support religious organizations, making religion the #2 DAF-supported cause nationally. So you need to remind your donors that they can support you through recurring grants. We also see that the wealth transfer will be coming and you need to be ready. With higher concentration of baby boomers and silent generation as regular church attendees, you should have a planned giving strategy in place. Storytelling around mission is important. Connecting generosity to mission is going to be key to sustaining donor engagement. That means that you may need to also revisit your mission and evangelism. Strengthen your efforts to retain, engage, and attract new members. And with a decline in attendance at regular worship services, we need to consider giving outside of the pew. Direct mail, online, and text messaging are effective. I did mention the success of direct mail. As a reminder, 86% of religiously affiliated donors respond to it, but the data also shows that religiously engaged donors are 400% more likely to respond to a text message than non-religious donors. So consider ways to integrate text messaging into your donor cultivation strategies if you've not done so already.
Okay, thank you so much, Amber. I appreciate that. Now we're going to dig a little deeper into the various sectors, and we're going to look at those that hit all-time highs in 2025. 5 of the 9 subsectors reached all-time highs in 2025. This was human services, education, health, arts and culture, and environment and animals. So I'm going to move on here I'm going to start with Renee here. So Renee, who's going to talk to us about human services first, what factors do you think contributed to these record levels? And what do you think organizations can do to sustain or continue this growth? Renee?
Great questions, Lynn. And I just want to give a shout out to my human services friends. I see we have good attendance and like 35 or so of you out there. So yay. Um, just as we look then at our human services subsector, it is hitting its all-time high performance last year in 2025. And these organizations include services that provide essential needs and services like food, shelter, and employment to support people within the US. So our results here in 2025, the giving to the subsector increased by 5.3% from the prior year of 2024 and is representing 15% of all charitable giving with a total of nearly $100 billion. I feel like Austin Powers there. But this is just wonderful news. This subsector has remarkably continues to grow as you look at the chart there with its growth and how it continues. That line just continues to go up, even after that spike we had in the pandemic levels of 2000 to 2001. And the other thing remarkable about this subsector is 2025 marks the fourth year that human services has overtaken higher ed to claim the number two spot in total charitable dollars. Because as Lynn mentioned, if you reflect back on that pie chart from 1985 to now, that what we've seen here in the human services sector is it's gone from just 5% of total giving to 15% of charitable giving and has the largest growth of any subsector over that time period. So this does make you wonder as you look at that decline that we saw in religion from 53% down to 23%, with many human services rooted in religion, that a lot of that caring for others and serving the poor, that aspect of religion may have transitioned to our human services subsector. So if we go and look at the contributing themes for the reasons why of this growth, number one, and you're going to be hearing a lot about this today, unfortunately, is the federal funding cuts. They created urgent private funding needs in the human services subsector like no other. Human services was especially vulnerable because on average, 32% of their revenue does come from government sources or did. So the reality of what happened to human services in 2025 is a whopping 65% experienced government funding cuts and 41% had to reduce their budgets because of this. So that hurt as far as fundraising, but then additionally, the services went up. So the need for services, so that demand for essential services continued to rise in food, housing, and mental health support. And in particular, as we look at one of the hardest hits was the federal food programs being reduced or changes to SNAP, and the federal government shutdown created immediate food insecurity hardships for millions of people across the US in 2025. Additionally, unfortunately, we also experienced unrelenting natural disasters that mobilized widespread generosity, like the LA wildfires and the Central Texas floods. So the reasons for this increase in fundraising is clear there with those two urgent needs. And how the fundraising got to an all-time high in 2025 was multiple different ways, but leading the charge is the major individual and foundation gifts increased, including that mega donor. So high net worth donors made substantial investments, including Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez Bezos. They had $102.5 million giving to 32 different nonprofits to combat homelessness in 2025. Additionally, the broad-based is that emergency and collaborative funding initiatives mobilized quickly, creating what we call crisis-driven generosity. And the tools like GoFundMe and platforms like FireAid and Grammy Fund allowed partners and communities to create emergency funds to address immediate needs widespread. Another topic you're going to hear a lot about today is DAF giving expanded, probably across every subsector, but in human services, organizations, they were among the top recipients for first-time charitable DAF gifts, or those DAF grants. So that's a topic that is very important and growing across the board, but especially in human services. Lastly, the online and crowd giving grew substantially. And that kind of goes hand in hand with that crisis-driven generosity to be able to do that in a swift way in order to make those raises. That's how that happened. Of note, the food bank area experienced exceptional fundraising growth with their online giving, and the benchmarking study reports almost a 24% revenue growth in just the food bank sector alone, subsector. So as we go on and think, then take that data and say, what are the key takeaways and recommendations for human services? Number one, we need to treat these government funding cuts, although they happened, we need to treat them as potentially long-term structural challenges and not just focus only on that immediate crisis giving. So this actually is the perfect opportunity to build a stronger case for private philanthropy before that crisis occurs, and can be the perfect conversation for legacy giving and forward thinking into the future and helping others long after you're gone. The other data showed that those nonprofits that used local current data and were very data driven and transparent with their donors, they also did very well. So that is a great tactic and idea to make sure you're sharing more detailed information with your donors and letting them know, hey, this is what your support is driving and doing. So then also with those DAF donors, as we got so many of the first-time DAF grants in the human services subsectors, we need to prioritize that. And so fundraisers should make DAF giving easy and maintain relationships with known DAF donors. I will say a shout out that I see on other industry conferences. I was at Bridge Conference in DC just a couple weeks ago, and there was so many sessions on DAFs and so many nonprofits recognizing this need to grow this area of fundraising. So kudos to the industry. And then additionally, we have these crisis donors, but of course we need to look at them for the long term. So we need to be creating strong welcome and stewardship sequences for them. So you can transform that one-time crisis donor into a recurring or annual, major, or even a legacy donor for your efforts. Additionally, strengthen that digital fundraising because it is a lot of crisis-driven giving. We need to be speedy and be able to turn things quickly. So really think about focusing attention and making sure donation pages are easy to use, mobile friendly. I cannot stress that enough. Like 70% of activity is going to the mobile phones, and consider about the rapid digital appeals that need to happen. And lastly, diversify fundraising channels. Even though I'm talking about digital, really what we see is that all the channels, multiple pathways, is what is helping lift these tides, whether that's major gifts, DAFs, corporate support, emergency funds, crowdfunding, monthly giving, online giving, direct mail, and even texting. We're seeing a surge in that. So yes, the news is that we have to do all the things. All right, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to our next presenter, Jana, who's going to share with us about education, who's also at a all-time high.
Thanks, Renee. I appreciate it. And welcome to all of our education sector participants. So in 2025, the enormous challenges with federal funding cuts and the expansion of the excise tax on higher education heightened the awareness and importance of fundraising, but also put additional pressures on fundraising teams. But the good news is both fundraisers and donors stepped up. Education had a really strong year in 2025. Giving reached $92 billion, an 11.7% increase. And even after adjusting for inflation, growth was nearly 9%. So again, another historic high for education this year, something to be proud of. Education does represent 14% of all charitable giving, which makes it the third largest sector in the country. And this creates a favorable fundraising environment, but also one where there's heavy competition for those philanthropic dollars. So let's look at what contributed to the historic year. When we narrow the lens from all education and dial into higher education specifically, we'll see that contributions reached an estimated $78.8 billion. Again, whoever said Austin Powers, I agree. When you say $1 billion, a 4% increase over the prior year. What's driving that growth? Growth is interesting. Both alumni and non-alumni giving did increase in 2025, with non-alumni giving just slightly more versus alumni. Our endowment gifts continue to represent a significant portion of higher ed philanthropy, equating to around 29% of the funds received. Now, a lot of those gifts are being restricted, which is also something to pay attention to, and we'll kind of touch on a little bit later. A headline of the report, going through the report, was giving from mega donors. That's been mentioned before as well. The Chronicle of Philanthropy revealed that gifts of $10 million or more increased substantially. There were actually 259 gifts in this category. That's a 28% increase over the prior year. So, a couple of extraordinary examples of that mega philanthropy in 2025 included Mackenzie Scott's $1.1 billion in gifts to education, and then a $2 billion gift to Oregon Health and Science University. I know our friends there were very excited, which that gift set a record for the largest gift ever made to a university. So congratulations to that team. And I also love seeing in the report the $100 million bequest received at the Georgia Institute of Technology, the largest gift ever received by that school. So go plan giving, go bequests. But after sharing the excitement about these mega gifts, it's important to reinforce or refocus and understand that what's important for most institutions is that growth isn't limited to just the extraordinary transformational gifts that we just got through talking about. For instance, independent schools, there was growth in median giving during 2025. Their data showed evidence that employees lead in giving participation, followed by parents. The reporting for primary and secondary schools saw a lift in annual fund giving in fiscal year 2025 compared to 2024 as well. There are opportunities across the donor pipeline. And when we think about plan giving in particular, focusing on donor retention is definitely going to be key. So now what? Here are a few takeaways from the larger report that I hope our education sector partners today can think about as far as their own individual programs. The first one is, first, impact matters. Donor behaviors are telling a story, whether it's restricting their gifts or really wanting to know about that impact. It's important for donors to be able to see what their gift makes possible, what their giving makes possible. So strong impact storytelling should be at the center of our fundraising. That way donors can connect to their passions and values, to the outcomes that they can help make happen at your institution. Second, relevance matters. We have some shared identities in the world of education, whether it's alumni, parents, faculty, and staff, or other affinity groups. When possible, taking the step to segment that messaging for these groups can give us a powerful way to make fundraising feel more personal and connected. Third, when you think about your strategy, don't overlook those generational differences. The different generations do engage with institutions and philanthropy differently. A one-size-fit-all approach is not necessarily going to do the best work. And this, again, will kind of tie back to the bullet of sharing that impact. For instance, in the education sector, our silent generation and baby boomer donors, they really still show a high degree of loyalty and a strong built-in urge to give back to their alma mater. But for some of the younger generations, depending on that same type of loyalty that those other older generations were demonstrating isn't going to be necessarily the smart move in the long run. There's a stronger need to have more compelling and impact-driven approaches for those younger folks. And for this group, also consider creative, robust, interactive social campaigns around giving days. Fourth, donor retention is, of course, critical. The mega gifts are super exciting, no doubt, but loyal mid-level donors can be some of our most promising plan giving prospects. For plan giving fundraisers, this could be one of the most important takeaways. Just again, refocusing that retention and loyalty definitely matter. These donors will make up the lion's share of your plan giving pipeline, which reinforces what many of us already know, that plan giving isn't just about wealth, it's about relationship longevity. Again, we're beating the drum pretty loudly on DAFs here, but I'll go ahead and sing that song too. They remain an important opportunity and should continue to be a part of our fundraising conversations. Education vertical receives 25% of all DAF grants, the largest of any sector. So really taking advantage in the education space to promote those and to be talking to your donors about those. And then finally, with that, with DAF giving, it gives us the opportunity to open up a conversation about leaving a planned gift with your DAF through a beneficiary designation. Last on the list, you'll see here for educational institutions, particularly higher ed, parents as well as faculty and staff may deserve more attention here. Their participation rates in giving can outperform alumni, making them a valuable audience and not just kind of that supplemental audience that we think about. So just a quick wrap up, 2025 data tells us that higher education philanthropy is healthy, but the opportunity isn't just at the top of the pyramid. Institutions that will benefit the most are ones that build those strong relationships across the donor pipeline, and those that really understand and do their best to motivate their audiences through storytelling and impact, and retain those donors as much as possible, and create pathways for donors to make meaningful gifts through their philanthropic lives. So lots to think about here, lots of things to focus on. But now I'll hand the mic over to my colleague Casey to talk about the health sector.
Thank you, Jana. As we shift to the health subsector, we're looking at organizational categories such as healthcare, mental health and crisis intervention, diseases, disorders, and medical disciplines, and medical research. And thanks to all of you from the health subsector who are on the call today. Giving to health organizations increased by 6.1% in 2025, totaling an estimated $61.43 billion. Adjusted for inflation, that's a 3.3% increase since 2024. And contributions to the health subsector compose 9% of all donations received by charities in 2025. So it's great to see this all-time high again and this upward trajectory continue. And yet we know that many health organizations are still operating on very slim margins. Philanthropy is essential still to ensure both current operations and future innovation continue in the healthcare and medical research space. And we've certainly been through a challenging year trying to do that. Let's just take a moment to remember everything that we navigated throughout 2025. These numbers are pretty powerful when you see them all together like this. Federal shutdowns, reduction in government funding, grant freezes, stop work orders, and new laws reducing access to healthcare created significant challenges. Demand for healthcare is increasing while supply of programs and services is decreasing. And in response to these challenges, many organizations and individuals stepped in to address critical funding gaps and help stabilize the subsector. The question is it enough? Emergency funding did help buoy medical research, but the report outlined just $13.4 million in emergency funds versus that $2.45 billion in funds rescinded through the NIH. And as another example, cancer survivors are turning to crowdfunding platforms like GoFundMe for assistance in covering medical and living expenses. And researchers tracked $506 million raised in total, which is amazing. yet it was only 34.5% of the $1.45 billion total sought. And while many nonprofits are relying more on transformational gifts, as others have mentioned, the report notes a period of recalibration for giving from high net worth individuals in the health subsector. That means mega gifts to health organizations declined in 2025. So there were 40 gifts of 10 million or more in 2025, totaling 1.7 billion. Again, this is amazing, but the total value is a 26% decrease from 2024, and the number of gifts fell 37%. Health accounted for 12% of total mega gift dollars in 2025, which was actually the sector's lowest share since 2018, and its first year at less than 2 billion since 2020. So we know it was a challenging year. There still are a lot of wins to celebrate and opportunities to lean into. Mega giving was down, but donors did respond rapidly to these obstacles on many fronts, driving the overall increase in healthcare giving that we see. Transformative gifts did help advance healthcare and medical research. Big names such as Phil and Penny Knight, Melinda French Gates, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and Mackenzie Scott were all named, among others. A number of noteworthy gifts included an artificial intelligence, machine learning, or advanced analytics component. And philanthropy also continues to support mental health needs. Community clinics, universities, institutes, and organizations like the JED Foundation and American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which are personally close to my heart. And particularly exciting for our line of work, planned gifts accounted for 4% of health mega gift dollars in 2025, which was up slightly from 3% in 2024. So as we are keeping an eye on the great wealth transfer, it does seem like the health subsector could be reaping some of those rewards. In addition, the top 30 peer-to-peer fundraising programs grew revenue 3.4% in 2025. Organizations like the American Heart Association, Alzheimer's Association, St. Jude, Blood Cancer United, and American Cancer Society were all noted for their successful events. The report also found that increased email outreach was associated with financial gains in 67% of participating organizations, underscoring the importance of digital engagement. Online donor retention reached 40%, which is a 16% year-over-year increase, continuing a multi-year trend of improving donor loyalty. And some organizations have also found success with perhaps less traditional, creative ways of giving, such as launching gaming campaigns or physician-only giving circles, for example. And so in terms of key takeaways, it's important to remember that there are many paths to generosity. And as others have said as well, diversification builds resilience. While mega giving declined for health, other channels and gift levels demonstrated strength, reinforcing the need for organizations to cultivate broad donor pipelines. It's a critical time to shift more attention toward estate planning and gifts of assets, as others have mentioned as well, because cash contributions are becoming harder for some donors to make. It's also important to continue strategically investing in staffing, infrastructure, and donor engagement. The report advises that organizations that align team size, institutional scale, and fundraising strategy continue to achieve the strongest performance outcomes. And for our Stelter clients on the call, know that we are so grateful to be part of that strategic investment in planned giving, and we're honored to partner with you to support this essential work. And so now I'll turn it over to Kit for a closer look at arts, culture, and humanities.
Yeah, thank you, Casey, and good afternoon, everyone. So in 2025, giving to arts, culture, and humanities reached $27.3 billion. That's the highest level recorded for this subsector, and it accounted for 4% of total charitable giving. Contributions grew more than 7% in current dollars and nearly 5% after inflation. So this includes support for visual and performing arts organizations, museums, humanities organizations, historical societies, and public media. Over the longer term, arts, culture, and humanities organizations have generally represented about 4 to 5% of total giving. This subsector has shown meaningful growth, although results can really vary considerably by organization type, and they tend to align with broader economic conditions. Even with the record giving this year, 2025 was a turbulent year for many arts and culture organizations because of major shifts in federal support. The National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, and Institute of Museum and Library Services all experienced staffing reductions, grant cancellations, or changing priorities. One especially significant example was the cancellation of the NEA's Challenge America program, which had provided relatively small but important grants to more than 270 organizations serving underserved communities. The report also notes that programs connected to diversity, equity, and inclusion also faced increased scrutiny, and diversity offices across the Smithsonian Network and National Gallery of Art were closed. These changes created particular challenges for smaller organizations and those relying heavily on public support. For those of you working in arts and culture, the experience of giving in 2025 may have looked very different depending on your type of organization. Orchestras showed particular strength, with Giving USA noting that gift counts grew 10% and inflation-adjusted contributed revenue rose 6%. Museum results were a little more mixed. Several institutions received significant gifts, and one recent data set showed average trustee giving more than doubling from 2023 to 2024. But government, corporate, and foundation support remained under pressure. Public media organizations saw especially strong online fundraising growth, while higher education arts programs attracted several major gifts. Theaters and operas faced greater challenges. Theater donation revenue declined 15%, while opera organizations reported lower attendance and a smaller share of revenue coming from ticket sales. We also saw continued growth through several giving channels. Arts, culture, and humanities organizations received DAF grants from nearly 250,000 Fidelity charitable accounts last year, a jump of 60% since 2020. We're also seeing arts and culture receive a larger share of grants from DAFs than share of overall giving, about 6% compared to 4%. Looking at online giving, online revenue increased 8% among cultural organizations and 37% among public media organizations in the M&R benchmark sample. And although the number and value of gifts of $10 million or more declined from 2024, major gifts remained influential. The largest arts and culture gift of the past decade, nearly $203 million, was made in 2025 to an art museum. Overall, the results show real philanthropic strength, but also significant variation by organization type, revenue model, and source of support. So given that mixed landscape, there are several practical opportunities for development teams. First, think of patrons, members, and subscribers not only as audiences, but as potential long-term supporters. Thoughtful follow-up can help turn participation into a deeper relationship with your organization. Arts organizations also have really unique cultivation opportunities. So behind-the-scenes access, artist conversations, previews, other experiences that can create that personal connection. And when you use those throughout the year, these touch points can build the trust that leads to greater support over time. Major and plain giving conversations can then connect that relationship to a compelling long-term vision. A donor might be motivated by preserving an institution, carrying forward an art form, expanding community access, or ensuring that future generations experience something that they value so personally. And finally, organizations should build readiness for campaigns and work to grow endowments and other long-term opportunities while continuing to develop recurring and donor-advised fund support. Together, these strategies can move supporters from participation to sustained investment and ultimately legacy giving. So next, I'm going to turn it back to Amber to share more about giving to environmental and animal organizations.
Thanks, Kit. So when looking at giving to environment and animals, we see that contributions to these organizations grew 11% from 2024 to $24.57 billion in 2025. When adjusted for inflation, giving these organizations increased by 8.2%. Even with this increase, giving to the environment and animals subsector is the smallest of the 9 major sectors tracked, representing 4% of total giving. Contributing themes to this increase include responses to federal funding cuts. Philanthropic support did remain strong for conservation, tribal, and wildlife efforts, along with zoos and aquariums, supported by successful fundraising, partnerships, and record-setting contributions. Some of these record-setting gifts include $15 million to John Ball Zoo and $10 million to Pittsburgh Zoo and Aquarium. There was also a $5.9 million planned gift to Heartland Animal Shelter. We also saw responses to the government shutdown. Private philanthropy provided critical support to national parks and public lands during the government shutdown. It also led to an increase in volunteers. And since volunteering helps to create a deeper affinity to an organization with donors, hopefully that increase in volunteering will also lead to an increase of gifts in the future. There was an increase in online and monthly giving. For environmental organizations, one-time online revenue was up 15% and monthly revenue was up 10%. For wildlife and animal welfare, one-time online revenue was up 9% and monthly revenue up 19%. Talking about monthly giving, I also want to note that monthly giving accounted for 32% of online revenue for environmental organizations and 35% for wildlife and animal welfare organizations. We also saw that year-end giving is important. Nearly 39% of annual environmental giving and a little over 38% of animal welfare giving occurred in Q4. So what are some key takeaways and recommendations for the sector? One, evaluate your funding mix. You may need to diversify how you're supported. More than 60% of revenue from a single source is a potential risk. Organizations should reduce reliance on any single funding source and build relationships with individual donors, foundations, corporations, and major gift donors. Planned gifts do fit in really well into that strategy because they can create a long-term source of financial support. Two, build partnerships. Partnerships can provide more than money. They can bring expertise, infrastructure, volunteers, advocacy, and expanded reach. Relationships with local partners and stakeholders did help Yosemite Conservancy maintain park services during staffing and funding shortages. Third, we also need to focus on unrestricted giving. During COVID, we saw the importance of unrestricted funds when so many programs and services were forced to suspend. This funding cut was another reminder. In an ever-changing landscape, unrestricted gifts give you the freedom to adapt resources if programs and services are canceled. Lastly, words matter, and donors need to understand the impact. We know the importance and planned giving of not using inside baseball terms when talking to donors about gift types. That also correlates to conversations with your donors about impact. In a study mentioned in the Giving USA report, we see an example where donors were asked about their support of climate justice. In the survey of 1,011 US adults, only about 1/3 of respondents reported understanding what climate justice means before being provided with an explanation. After its goals and framework were explained, 53 of respondents expressed support of climate justice. This is just a reminder that words matter, and in marketing, where you don't have the opportunity for back and forth conversation in your messaging, make sure you're communicating your mission and impact in a way that's easy to understand, because education and storytelling can change understanding, potentially increasing support.
Thank you so much to all of our strategists. And we have two more subsectors to go. We're going to look at those that had modest increases. Both public society benefits and international affairs increased in 2025. Not quite as large as they were in 2024 because public society benefit grew 19.5% in 2024 and international affairs grew by 17.7%. So we're going to hear back from Kit and Renee on these two as we round out our webinar today. So to Kit and Renee, what do you think is driving these gains, and what do you think organizations can continue to sustain or continue this growth? Kit, I'll pass it off to you.
Yeah, thanks and great questions. So, public society benefit is interesting in that it's a pretty broad category. It includes civil rights and voter education organizations, community improvement and capacity building groups, science and social science organizations, professional associations, military and veterans organizations, and some philanthropic intermediaries. So in 2025, giving to these groups increased 11.6% to just over $72 billion, representing about 11% of total charitable giving. And what's notable here is not just the dollar growth, but the growing share of philanthropy that's going to this category. Public society benefit represented about 7 to 8% of giving through 2015, then increased to 9% from 2016 to 2020, and now represents 11%. So we're really seeing this subsector become a larger part of the overall philanthropic landscape. The top line growth here is encouraging, but there are three important dynamics beneath that number. First, 2025 brought significant growth in direct people centered giving. Crowdfunding, mutual aid, and emergency response campaigns allowed donors to see an immediate connection between their support and a tangible need. We saw this play out very clearly after the LA wildfires early in 2025. The California Community Foundation raised more than $100 million from 50,000 donors, while more than 100 mutual aid organizations mobilized to meet highly localized needs like temporary housing, gift cards, and basic supplies. Second, donor advised funds played an especially important role. Contributions to national DAF sponsors surged late in the year, particularly driven by strong markets and partly by tax planning ahead of changes taking place in 2026. So, because Giving USA classifies many national DAF sponsors, things like Fidelity Charitable, within this subsector, these contributions significantly influence the total. For some perspective, in 2024, which is the latest year with complete IRS data, net DAF contributions represented 40% of giving classified within this subsector. It's worth remembering, however, that some of this money may still be sitting in those DAF accounts rather than having reached the operating nonprofits. Finally, many organizations faced significant funding uncertainty. Government grants were delayed, reduced, or canceled even as demand for services continued to grow. In response, foundations and other funders used rapid response grants, collaborative initiatives, and longer term commitments to help fill immediate gaps. So, what do these patterns mean for development teams? For public society benefit organizations, donors increasingly want to see clear evidence that their support is making a difference. Fundraisers should communicate impact in specific human terms, showing both measurable results and the people or communities behind them. At the same time, ongoing uncertainty around government funding reinforces the need for a broad and dependable base of individual support. That means investing in relationships across giving levels rather than relying too heavily on grants or a small number of major gifts. Organizations should also offer donors flexible ways to respond, including donor advised funds, planned gifts, and other tax smart strategies. These options can help donors support urgent needs today while also contributing to the organization's long term strength. And for plan giving teams in particular, that means thinking beyond bequests alone and being prepared to talk with donors about the full range of ways they can use their assets to support both immediate and long term needs. Finally, crisis driven fundraising should be treated as the beginning of a relationship, not the end. Strong follow up, transparency, and continued engagement can help convert an immediate response into lasting support beyond the moment that first prompted that gift. So finally, I'll turn it back to Renee for our last subsector.
All right, great. And thanks for hanging in there with us, everyone. I know we're at the top of an hour here, but this is our last subsector, but it's a great one. So this is our international affairs organizations. So this is organizations that are engaged in international aid, development, and disaster relief, working on peace, security, and human rights issues. And when I looked at the poll, I saw we had about 10 folks here from the international affairs sector. I just want to say, there is less volume of these nonprofits, but they are mighty. If you consider the Forbes Top 100 charities in 2025, it includes 28 of your international affairs organizations. So you are a mighty but small volume of groups. So thanks for being with us, and we are honored to work with you. In 2025, you'll see that giving to this subsector increased by 4.1% over 2024, and it represents now 5% of all charitable giving, with a total of over $33 billion raised to it. And if you look at this line chart, more than any other subsector, you're going to see how it is crisis driven a lot in our emergencies that happen worldwide. So that is why we see lots of ups and downs on this. And you'll see our highest point was during the COVID-19 pandemic years. And you see now where we've leveled off to kind of like right where we were before that, and we're holding steady there. So the other item that I could kind of point out on this subsector as well, actually in 1985, it was not a subsector on the chart. You'll see there the year that they began tracking for international affairs was 1987. So that is when this subsector has grown over the years to up to 5%. So again, a lot of them, international affairs are rooted in religious beliefs. And so I feel like some of that religious giving could also be going to this subsector as well. When we look then here at the 2025 numbers and what are the reasons for this increase or this slight modest increase in this subsector, is that as well, government funding cuts created this urgent philanthropic need. With the closure of USAID and broader reductions in foreign assistance, it forced many international development and humanitarian organizations to reduce staff, scale back programs, or close offices. So that was a large factor in the giving. The other is, again, just like in human services, unfortunately, the humanitarian crisis has continued to increase with things such as Hurricane Melissa in the Caribbean, the humanitarian crisis in Sudan, ongoing needs in Gaza, and continued displacement caused by the war in Ukraine. So how these giving dollars happened, and that emergency philanthropic funding was mobilized very quickly after the USAID reductions, and US donors and nonprofits raised more than $125 million for international affairs affected by those cuts. This was kind of this subsector was the tip of the spear for the cuts. How the recovery also was, again, through the major gifts and unrestricted funding increased. So where last year when I was talking, those gifts of $1 million or more had leveled off and gone down, actually in 2025, pledges of $1 million or more to international causes rose from 30 million last year or in 2024 to up to 572 million in 2025. So that's a massive difference, going from 30 million the prior year up to 572 million. And a lot of this was your big players. The pledge challenges of up to 500 million to UNICEF, and significant unrestricted gifts from Mackenzie Scott, who gave 38% of her $7.1 billion to international affairs causes in 2025. Definitely the rise of the mega donor is here. The other, online giving, again, because of that urgency and crisis-driven generosity, online giving and recurring increased 15%, while the number of online gifts increased by 10% in this subsector. And I know it's a broken record, but DAFs, the DAFs, Giving Circles, crowdfunding, and pooled funds created additional channels for giving to these types of organizations. So as we look at the key takeaways for international affairs, we want to focus on urgency and relevancy. I know it might feel like we're always in that state, but clearly explain how the government funding reductions have affected programs and communities and beneficiaries. Also, make that digital giving experience seamless, where we're making sure everything is mobile friendly. And honestly, a big one in here is optimizing recurring giving, prioritizing that, and also optimizing DAF giving, those two growing opportunities for support. The other element, which is really important, I think, for international affairs, is because your support happens not here in the U.S. or your clients are not here in the U.S. and what you do is global. Talking to donors about what motivates them. So using things like donor surveys and digital engagement to understand how your donors are connecting with these programs. And then, as I mentioned before, strengthen those monthly giving programs. That's the bread and butter. That recurring giving will really help you continue that long-term support as opposed to just the crisis-driven one-time donor. And the other item, again, because this is global efforts and not in the back door of our donors, provide direct access to program expertise. So consider doing virtual briefings, live updates, webinars, or conversations with program leaders, because geographically this can feel distant to donors. So that's the added challenge we have here in the international affairs sector. And then the last two things I've kind of seen are very unique, I think, to our international affairs group is participating in collaborative and pooled fund opportunities. So unlike any other time, we're seeing UNICEF and Save the Children and CARE, so many different organizations coming together on pooling on some of their programs. And so that is the wonderful thing about working, I think, in the nonprofit space is that we know that we work when we come together, we're able to do greater things. And lastly, I do want to end on, this is a lot of crisis-driven giving that we're seeing, but really consider making the case before the emergency occurs through that legacy giving and helping far into the future. And Lynn, I think I'm passing it off back to you.
You are. Thanks so much, Renee. All of you are so insightful. I hope everyone on that is listening to today's webinar and for future recordings is learning something a little about not only their sector but for all of the sectors. So let's start taking a look at 2026, right? We're more than halfway through August already. And so let's look at ahead. I told you there's one more poll here. So I would like to launch that poll. So Becca, thank you. What one factor do you see most influencing giving this year that may impact what we see in the Giving USA 2027 report? So we've talked about new tax law briefly. We've talked about economic conditions. This would be like the stock market or inflation. We talked about the federal funding changes, right? The executive orders and the elimination of grants or the reduction of grants. What about the political climate? We have midterms coming up, right? Declining public trust. This could be whether it's, government or it would be, to charities. Crisis response, what would that be? Like natural disasters. Renee talked about that the floods in central Texas or the LA wildfires. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's something that is not on our radar, but it may be on yours. So go ahead and vote and let's take a look at the responses. Okay, what am I seeing here? New tax law just at 9%, economic conditions 48%, federal funding changes 13%, political climate 24%, so that's second, declining public trust 3%, crisis response 1%, and other 1%. Thank you so much for voting. I'm going to take the 9% and talk just briefly about the tax law. So I do think that that's going to impact giving in 2026. According to the Lilly School of Philanthropy, the total decrease in giving as a result of the tax reform is 5.7 billion. That's in their report that can be found online. And that's really because of bullet points, really 2, 3, and 4 here. Deduction floor for itemizers, cap for high earners, new corporate giving threshold. But that universal deduction, here is your pipeline, 8 million more donors estimated. These are for the individuals who don't itemize, which is 90%. So this is your new pipeline for planned giving. So I know we're just about at time here, and I'm just going to really quick, I'm just for so if you can give me like a 20-second spiel here for all of my strategists, what factors do you see influencing giving today that may impact what we see in the 2027 report? I'll start with Kit.
All right. So, first, with public society benefit, I think this sector has seen really strong growth over the past couple of years. I think we're going to likely to see another good year of growth here in 2026. Part of that's going to be those national large donor advised funds. But we're also seeing, donors respond to issues around immigration, ICE enforcement. Uh, we have the midterms coming up, so maybe have another wave of what I'd call reaction giving as people respond to that. Arts and culture also has had a pretty strong run over the past few years. I think we're likely to see continued growth, but maybe at a slightly slower pace. And I think a lot of that is probably going to be tied to the economic market.
Thanks. Casey, health sector?
Yes. So, in addition to Giving USA, we also have the Association for Healthcare Philanthropy, and they have reported previously about continued stability and normalization in healthcare philanthropy following, pandemic times. And so, I'll be interested to see, how those trends hold up, and hopefully we are continuing to stabilize. And then also when we think about plan giving, of course, we're talking at length about baby boomers and the great wealth transfer, but there are also reports from Blackbaud and Giving USA that have indicated it's actually the younger generations like Gen X and Millennials and Gen Z that have more affinity for healthcare giving. So I think it'll be important to keep watching that in the future, which could drive how we segment audiences and messaging and plan giving marketing.
Oh, thank you, Casey. Renee.
I just want to say bless you, Casey, for calling Gen X a younger generation. Yeah, so looking at international affairs and human services, really, they are, as I spoke about, they are driven by crisis generosity, is what we've seen over the last few years. And this is an unfortunate statistic that I found for this. In 2026, we have already experienced 12 individual billion-dollar weather and climate disasters during the first half of 2026. I know at one point, everyone I talked to all across the country, it was the smoke and the fires. So unfortunately, I envision this upward trend in giving to continue because the crisis and emergencies will continue. But as the polling shows here, the question may be, capacity, given that also the economic affordability crisis that we are experiencing here in the US. But however, like we've seen in the last few years, it's been that mega gifts, the large high-end donors, that high net donors that have really kept that revenue pendulum on the upswing. And so I do see that trajectory continuing.
Okay, and Amber.
Yeah, so for religion, if we're only looking 1 year ahead, I do think it's unlikely that religion's share of overall giving is going to outpace inflation, but it could remain fairly flat. However, I do believe that it will absolutely remain the largest piece of the pie there. With DAF giving, I do think that churches and organizations who embrace the idea of educating and reminding their donors that DAF giving is an option may find themselves at an advantage. So I think that's going to be exciting to see. For environment and animals, I believe that while overall giving to this sector is going to continue to grow, we may not see the same level of increase that we saw last year. But going back to what Renee was saying about the number of natural disasters, historically, we have seen spikes in giving due to visibility of climate issues related to natural disasters. And since we've already seen a number of natural disasters happen around the world this year, that's also a possibility. There's also a lot of discussion about threats to public lands that's creating some donor interest. And then with animals, there was a slight increase of adoption rates in 2025. When we combine that with the overall increase we saw in the sector, I feel optimistic that support of animals are going to continue to grow as well.
Thank you so much. So actually, we're a little over time. Hopefully the Q&A, were you able to answer a lot of questions while everyone else was talking? I hope some questions
Still
are
have about
answered.
10 minutes, Lynn.
Oh, do we still have 10 minutes? Okay.
Yeah. So we have a couple questions. So yeah, big thank you to Lynn and our panel of subject matter experts. Incredible information today. We do have a couple questions in here. We did answer some of them as we went, but have a couple probably for you, Lynn. So I'll direct them to you, and we'll see if anybody else wants to pop in. We appreciate you guys sticking through it with us here. This great information shared. Lynn, question for you. Can you please explain corporate contributions impact in 2027 with tax laws?
Yes. So for the first time, corporate contributions have a 1% floor, and that has actually never happened before. So the Lilly School of Philanthropy is actually expecting a decrease in corporate giving as a result of that. Now, I think it could also go both ways. Maybe corporations give over that 1% and increase their giving. I think we could also see corporate DAFs come into being where they will bunch their giving into a corporate DAF account and then continue their regular cadence of giving throughout the year or in future years too. But I do think that corporations will be looking at that 1% floor and trying to figure out how best to get to also get a tax advantage and work around that 1% floor.
Wonderful. Thank you. One more question here, and then if anybody else has questions, please pop them in, and then we'll wrap up. Len, probably to you, but looking for other insight if another expert has some thoughts. Any recommendation on how to reach DAF donors as a nonprofit that does not manage DAFs? What is the ROI on something like DAF Day if we do not partner with a DAF managing company?
I can jump in there as well,
Go ahead.
Lynn, with some thoughts. So really, the DAF giving, the money has already gone into some very large charitable Fidelity, Schwab. The money is there. I think what we're talking a lot about is reaching donors to make the grants out of the DAFs that are there. And so I will put in a plug. Our survey, actually, one of the question is how do you currently support your organization? And one of the choices is donor advised funds, as well as ways they will consider. So that is one way you can try to identify DAF donors. As I sat in on that session at Bridge a few weeks ago, where we had some people focused on DAF giving, actually dedicating personnel to digging into the data and finding out and connecting the dots more on the gifts that you are getting from Fidelity and so forth is really a good use of time. We are seeing the DAF, they shared how DAF donors, we used to think of that as just wealthy donors that are making these DAF gifts coming down. We are seeing, they shared like $500 DAF grants and these lower, even more modest level DAF grants. So, and I'll just also say, you could consider doing some kind of targeted effort where you are talking about donor advised fund, but the grant part of it is what I want to say. We want to make sure there is that money already given to charity. And so really it's our job as fundraisers to get that money out of those DAFs and into the programs that we are serving. So that's what we like to focus on here at the Stelter Company, I think.
Thank you, Renee. A couple other questions coming in here. Appreciate it. Is there any data that compares giving in urban, suburban, and rural areas and the trends in giving by geographic location?
I think that there is a report on that from Giving USA. There is a specific report, and it's a book that you can purchase from Giving USA on that information specifically. So I don't have any data to give you, but there is a resource out there from Giving USA. And if you go to the website, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. But if you can't, my email's on the screen. Feel free to email me, whoever asked that question, and I'll be happy to forward that link on to you.
We have another question here, but it maybe have to pause for delay it for another webinar. It's how many participants today have a DAF pay button on their giving site. So that's maybe a poll we can do in a future webinar that we have coming up. I do not see any other questions, guys. Fantastic job. Unless another one comes in here, we're going to wrap up. So once again, Thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope you've had some aha moments and that this conversation will serve you as we close out 2026 and beyond. There are a few more chances for you to connect and learn before the year ends. Next week, we're very excited to host Nathan Chappell, the founder of Fundraising AI and first ever Chief AI Officer at Virtuous, where Nathan spearheads responsible AI initiatives for some of the sector's most innovative organizations. I'm sure many of you recognize his name because of his many contributions to the field over a decades-long career. He'll be giving us a look at the future of fundraising, the possibilities and challenges of AI, and the ideas shaping a more personalized approach to generosity. So don't miss that one. That's coming up Wednesday, August 26th. You can register at stelter.com. And then we have many more coming up here and some great ones. We're excited to present our latest research, which is in partnership with TIAA Caspic on Wednesday, September 13th. Fellow President Nathan Stelter will be joined by Bill Knox. He's the head of technical consulting, a genius. He's at Caspic. They will be exploring the untapped audience of single premium immediate annuity buyers and whether this group, who collectively invest 14 billion annually in SPIAs, could represent a potential pool of charitable gift annuity prospects. Should be very interesting. Watch out for an email invitation. Be sure to register for that one. As always, we wish you much success with your fundraising. And if there's anything we can do to support you along the way, please reach out. We're here to help. Thanks so much for attending today. Take care.